Now in this instruction set we will show you how to make and build this car. We call it truck, T.R.U.C.K, truck, because you can make, for example, something like pickup truck like this, but you can make so much more different variants of this car. But first you have to make the basic, and then on top of this you can make all different types of cool designs as you like. So in the following steps we will go through very slowly each step how to build this up from scratch, from your parts in the kit. But I would say that it would be advisable to have a couple of tools which are not really included in the kit, but most households have them. Some pliers of some kind, can be bigger also, it doesn't need to be pointy, but some kind of pliers is handy. To attach the wheels, some kind of screwdriver, Phillips, medium size would be perfect. You would probably find one in the household. This one can come in handy. It's a socket wrench part for the 3mm standard. It's 5.5mm across. It's not necessary, you can use the plier instead, but it's quite handy. You will see later in the instructions. Supplied in the kit is our super magnetic screwdriver, which is really, I will demonstrate, it's really magnetic, so that it really holds the bolts without falling out, and it's really handy. Also this one for when you have to tighten bolts in very tight spots or special occasions, so this is also included, these two tools in the kit. So we'll start with the step 1, and good luck. First step of this build is to make 4 wheel arches, and I made 3 already because I'll only show how to make one of them. They are identical. You will see here in the top left corner how many you want to build of a certain part. Most often when I start building with beams, I put in the nuts first. Much easier to put in the nuts into the beams when they're lying flat on the table, and I only put them in slightly into the slot with my hands. Later I will push them all the way in. So I'll just do all the nuts. You can see on the illustration where you want to have your nuts positioned. It's easy to see in the picture where they are put in. Now, and I use the back side of the screwdriver to push the nut all the way in. You should have them most accurately pushed doing this. It will be straight in the middle of the slot and it goes fast. Then I will start with connecting the beams together using these 45 degrees brackets. Best way is to just loosely fit the bolt and then put in these fillers, 45 degrees fillers. The sole purpose of that part is just to make the bend look more pleasing, a more better smooth look. So it's no constructional purpose, so to say. Loose fit of the bolt, slid in the 45 degrees fillers, then the 4 centimeter beam on each end of the 5 centimeter in the middle there. Tighten the joint like this. Now we continue with the next 45 degree bend. We're sliding in these fillers. We can then put in the 2 centimeter beams, and we will soon have all beams fitted together. It's very handy that this screwdriver is super magnetic. We have a neodymium magnet inside there. It's so easy to pick up the bolts, and when you have placed it, it really will not fall out. The last step is just to put on the 2 twisted brackets, which function as connecting feet to for the next step. So they are simply connected in each end of the wheel arches like this, and the last one. So this is how to make the wheel arch. You make 4 of them and you're finished with step 1. Step 2, which is quite simple. We are now connecting 2 and 2 wheel arches together with a couple of beams. I will show you. I made 1 already, but I'll show you how to make step 2. Starting with the nuts into the beams, as always. You will find hashtag numbers on the instruction pictures, and that means where in the beam to put the nut. So that's the secret about these numbers that you can see on the picture here. All of these are from number 2 slot from each side, like this. Now the only thing we need to do is to connect the wheel arches onto the beams. And this is all there is to the step number 2, to make 2 identical parts like this. step number 3, we'll just prepare 2 beams to be connecting these in the next step. So it's quite a simple step, just preparing 2 beams with brackets. We again locate the positions of the nuts and start with putting in the nuts into the beams, as always. So here it says that there's a nut in the 8th position. I count to 8 and put the nuts there, and in the other end there is also a nut, and that's all the nuts needed for this step. Then there's a 2-hole simple bracket in each end. In this end they are sticking out on a 90 degree. We also have these angled L bracket. We call it L bracket for obvious reasons. These are adjustable, so you just loosely fix them because they may be adjusted in a later stage, but the other one can be really tightened quite well. This was step 3. Step number 4. In this step we're just combining all the previous sub-assemblies into one bigger one. Using the 2 wheel arch parts together with the prepared beams from the last step, we're quite simply following the instructions for where to put the joining beams, but once we have located that, it's good just to start with putting in nuts as in an early as possible stage, because it really simplifies the building to have the nuts already in place. That will be for the back end of this beam. Then you put something for the middle. In this step we use 6 nuts together, of course, with 6 bolts. We find position number 6 and put in a nut, and we find the same on the other side, and we should be ready to do the assembly. These are the adjustable brackets. They are used because having 45 degrees in a construction sometimes gives a geometry that needs a little bit adjusting to get it right. 6 bolts. Last 2, and you can see the shape of things. It will be the bottom frame of the car. A little bit adjustment so it looks as it is a perfect arch shape, and everything comes together. That was step 4. Step number 5. This is just where we mount the servo for the steering. So quite a simple step, but I'll show you. First of all, with the instructions, you can see that with the hash tag number, you see which slot to put in the nut. In this case, the right one is number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it says also on the upper slot. So remember that. Then we use a brass standoff part, 8mm, because if we use a nylon one, you could risk it break because the servo is quite strong, so we chose a brass one. So one standoff is now on slot number 5, but then the other one is going to be on number 4 because we're having these diagonal fix of the servo. The only thing left now is to use a 6mm bolt and slip the servo in between. You need the wire to be on the lower side. Loosely fix on the one side, on the other side, and you can start tightening. There is the servo fixed. In step number 6, we're quite simply preparing a strip bracket to be the link between the steering mechanism and the servo arm. So, following the instructions with 12mm bolts, first through the end of the strip bracket and then into the hole in the servo arm. Now we'll just take a lock nut, make sure it's a lock nut, and just enter it so it's staying there. On the other end of the strip bracket we will have this L-twist mirrored bracket. You will see it quite clear in the instruction exactly which type and where it should be attached. It will be on the underside of the strip bracket with the bolt from the top through the strip bracket and then the twisted L bracket, and then just enter the lock nut. The only thing we have to do now is to tighten, but we will not tighten more than necessary because this will also be a moving mechanism, so not too loose because it will be a bit imprecise, but not tight so it will have too much friction, of course. That goes for both ends here. First I tighten and I take half a turn back and check if it's having a nice movement. That's it in step number 6. Step number 7. In this step we're making a sort of case that will hold the steering mechanism, so it will be placed here. But we just make it as a separate part, so we just put this away, and it consists of 4 quite equal call them legs, that are the basis for the case. So I will show you just how to make one of them. I made 3 already. They have C brackets that goes in each direction from each end of the beam, so that's quite simple. I put the nuts in one direction and in the other direction, and I used the C brackets. Now we have 4 of these. Each of these 4 is attached to 9 centimeter long beams, and I will do exactly that. I will attach them the C brackets will be pointing outwards from the, so it will be easier to fix the case on the car. We'll make another one. It's slot number 2 from each end. Now we have 2 equal sides. We will now connect them together with also a 4 centimeter beam in one end. And now we're using the simple 2-hole bracket, and we can probably just fix them first into the 4 centimeter beam. If you like, we can try to just assemble it, and we will see that we will need 2 nuts under each of these 2. This time I'm just doing it while things are in the model there, so by this we're almost finished, but there's one small detail left. It will need 2 angled 2-hole 90 degrees brackets that will be used later for another assembly, so we will prepare it here. It will need nuts in slot number 3. It's pointed out in the instructions. 1, 2, 3. From the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and the same on the other side. Here are these 2-hole 90 degrees. So I just assembled them exactly like in the instruction. I don't need to tighten too much because it's an adjustable one, and it might be adjusted when the other part is fixed later. So, but you just at least partly tighten. This is the case for the steering mechanism finished. Step number 8. This step we're going to make some wheel bearings, which is the connection between the wheels and the car, and we're making 3 of them. I made 2 already, and I will make the 3rd as you watch. We start with this middle section, which is between the bearings, and this one will just connect with a 35mm bolt, M3 35mm bolt. I'm using this socket for M3 to help when screwing this into the nut. The nut is a lock nut with the flat end into the plastic. The lock nut will make it stay there and not loosen in time. Quite many turns, then when you get to the end, you quite tightly fix it. Now it's ready to receive the bearings. One in each end, and it might be sometimes a little bit tight, but it will look like this, the inner part of this assembly. They can now be put into the 2 equal halves, like this. Before we close it, we will put in the wheel nut. It's a standard 12mm hex wheel fix, and we put an M4 lock nut. It's important that it's an M4. You will see it's slightly bigger than the M3, and with the flat end down when you put it into the wheel fix. The round end, you will see now, is up. Now this can be slipped into the other half there, and it's time to close together with the other. But before we're finished, we'll put 2 bolts, 12mm this time, to hold the 2 halves together. First I just entered nuts and lock nuts also this time. During the whole step 5 we're only using lock nuts. I use small tricks to, when the nuts are slipping and you want to fix it, I just put a normal small flat screwdriver inside there to hold slightly the lock nut so it doesn't turn around. And once you have just tightened these 2, then you have this finished wheel bearing like this. 3 of them you have to make. Step number 9. We're quite simply starting to make parts for the steering mechanism. This exact part will be used to fix the wheel bearing later, the later stage. I will show you, it's 2 of them, so I made one already. I'll make another one. If we want to start with nuts into the beams, like always, it's a good strategy. This time we're fixing some C brackets on each end. Quite simple. I'll do that first, so they are in their place. The next step here is to put in what we call beam plugs. They will be good for stabilizing the connection to the wheel bearings. It's kind of a strengthening, stabilizing part. You slip it into the channel of the beam. This time be aware that we have to use 8mm bolts, not 6, which is the standard, because we need 2mm more. Put in the beam plug, just as you see it in the illustration. Then you put beam plug number 2 on the other side, slip it into the bolt. Now we are also using another nut type. It's a 6x6mm square nut. Not so often used, but it has to be used here. Tighten, and that's it. Step number 10, quite a simple one as well, but I want to point out that there are 4 parts to be made. 2 plus 2. They are very similar, but they are mirrored. So you will probably see that they are the same, but rather just opposite of each other. So I'll show how to do it. Very simple. Put in the nuts again, as we always do in the beams. So we'll see in the instructions that one of these strip brackets is pointing to one direction. We put it into the beam. Remember that it's hole number 2 that is going to be used, then it will be a bit more stable. So not the outer hole in the strip bracket, but number 2. That was one. Now we will make sure that the other one is mirrored. Yes, it is. And that's it. Step number 11. We will now combine the sub-assemblies that we did on the 2 previous steps into a more complete part of the steering mechanism. And they are 2 mostly identical parts, but they are also mirrored, as you will see in the instructions. I made one and will show you how to make the second one. The one I made is the one on the left side of the illustration. The other one will be mostly the same, but on the other side of the car. This time we're using 12mm bolts together with lock nuts. Well, I'm starting to assemble it simply by putting the 12mm bolts through the outer hole of the strip bracket there and enter the lock nut like this, and then I'll continue with the lower part of this. Entering the bolt, and now I want to tighten these. I want to use a plier to hold. I found that to be the easiest. And also very important in this step, you're not supposed to tighten all in, so because this will be kind of a hub for the steering, so you will have exactly the correct tightening so that it swirls around freely, but not too loose. Of course, you will get a bit too inaccurate steering, but quite you'll find out, not too tight or not too loose. The other part, other side. Now it's tightened, and I go back half, for example, half a turn, and it's perfect. Step number 12 is to fix the wheel bearing into the previous steering mechanism that we made. So you can see that this is like a steering and turning of the wheels, starting to look like something. I'll show you that I made the left part, I'll show you the right part. You put the wheel bearing with the long bolt into the hole there. You enter the lock nut, 3mm lock nut, and then comes the trick how to tighten. I'm using this key together with the plier, and I tighten it like this. I can tighten quite much. That's it. Step number 12 finished. Using this L-shaped hex key as a helper. Step 13, a small part in the steering mechanism. It's the arm that is used close to the wheel. I'll show you this step, which is a little bit special because we're fixing a bracket in a non-standard way. If you see in the illustration on the top left corner, we put in the nuts as usual and pushes them into the beam. Now we find the correct bracket of this L-twist type, because on the one side we use one type and the other is the mirrored type. Make sure that you find the correct one according to the illustration. Also, we're not fixing this bracket the same way we normally do. We put it directly on the nut, so it will be almost on the outer part of the beam, but that's by purpose. It has to do with the geometry of the steering mechanism. Now it looks a little bit different than normal. We are putting the bolt holding the bracket, but it's connected on the outside of the nut. On the other side here we have a 2-hole simple that is going to be used to fix the arm into the previous steering mechanism, and I'll very quickly make the other part, which is a mirror of the first, so that in this case, again on the outside of the bolt, fastening the bracket, two-hole simple in the other. You can see these two parts are mirrored of each other. Step number 13 is finished. Step 14, quite a simple part. It's the cross beam in the steering mechanism. So I'll follow the instruction. On each end we put in 2 nuts into the bolt, 2 nuts into the beam, and we're making sure that we use the correct twisted bracket, L bracket again. The one on the right side will have the round part with the round hole part on the underside. Also noted in the instruction is that they are going to be fixed all pulled out to the side before you tighten the bolt. On the other side, the same. Pull it all out to the outer position, and it's finished. Step 15, which is to fix the cross beam onto the two small steering arms. Now, in this step we're using 16mm bolts, and we use these 5mm small distance towers in plastic. Make sure that you're holding this part from the previous step the same way as in the instructions. You put on this distance part, and you'll find from step number 10, you'll find a small arm and try to pick the right one, so it is the correct version of the right or left. It should be easy to see in the instructions which it is. First we can just enter a lock nut, and we'll do the same on the other side, putting in 16mm bolt, distance tower there, and it should look like the instructions illustration. Before we tighten, we will look that it looks like the instruction, and it does. We will now use a plier, or we can use the socket, wrench socket. This time, again, as a few other steps, we need a moving sort of hub, and we're tightening it just enough so it's a smooth operation, but as tight as possible so it's not unprecise, both sides. Don't tighten it hard, don't let it be too loose, because these are going to be moving parts. I think something like this. That's it for step 15. Step 16 is to connect the crossbeam with the small steering arms to the wheel mechanism. I like to try to place these two parts as they approximately will be placed in position to each other. So follow close the instructions and try to place them in so that you recognize them. And when you're attaching this crossbeam, it's not on the outer position that you will swing these two arms. You have to have them in the inner position, and the crossbeam should be facing up. In this case also these are the up direction. So this is where the crossbeam is positioned, but first we need nuts. I'll place it there. The nuts will then go on the outer position, and I will push them in. Now I will take one and one this one first. Like that. The next one. Sometimes you have to be careful when all the parts are like easy to swap between right and left and stuff like that. I will fix this side, and now we are close to a more finished steering mechanism, when the two right and left parts are connecting with the crossbeam. This will be used later when we have come a little bit further into the building of the model. But we place it, put it aside for now, steps finished. Step 17. This is where we start to attach the steering mechanism that we made in previous steps into the frame. First of all, we need to put in the nuts. That's always a good advice, and in this case we have marked them red, and they're put in the lower part of the car into the long beam there in position 7 and 8, slot number 7 and 8, counted from the front of the car. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the lower slot, and the one neighbor goes there, 7 and 8. And the same on the other side. I'll just do it like this. I don't need to count because I just put them equally on each side. There we go. We have the nuts we need. We use 16mm bolts to fix this. Now this is a little bit, of course, complicated, this steering mechanism, but you want to hold it let me see. This upper one will not be fixed now, it's the lower ones that we're going to fix, and I will slip this into the frame, and it's on the underside, and you will see this. It's the underside which is fixed to these bolts. So you will use the 16mm bolts to I'll take both and fix, so that's one side is done. Then I'll try to take the other side. So seems I got it now. Last bolt, and we'll just check if we have made it correct. Yeah, seems like a kind of steering mechanism. The upper one will be taken in a later step. That's it. Step 18. In step 18, it's just to connect the servo arm assembly into the steering mechanism. And it's just one nut and one bolt. It is indicated here that it is put into the beam in slot number 3. And then we count 1, 2, 3. Like this. It's important to read the instruction to see that it will be put into the leftmost position in this adjustable bracket. So first we enter the bolt, but not tightening it all together, and connect it with the leftmost position so into the center of the car. I will use this other Allen key tool because this is a bit tight spot. So you will probably use that too. So this is step 18. Step 19. 19 is where we're putting this case for the steering mechanism into the frame, and also attaching the upper arms into this same frame. And like we always want to do with the totem building is to put in nuts first into the beams, so we don't need to have a bit more difficult time later. And I think it's the best to just put the 2x2 nuts into the steering mechanism on the upper position. It's easier when the case is not already assembled, so we're doing that as well. 2 on each side, upper slot, and using the screwdriver to push them through. There we go. The nuts that are holding the case are on these 2 long beams, and it's indicated that they're at the 6th slot, counted from here, and then 16, but you can also see that it's the second last in this beam. You don't need to count 16, it's just there for a reference. I'll put in those in slot number 6 first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's in the lower position. Number 2 from the other side, lower position. And use the screwdriver to fully enter the nuts. Now it should be possible to really easily fix the case for the steering mechanism. So we'll position it with the brackets above the nuts that we have just put in, using normal 6mm here to fix each of the 4 corners. Take this one maybe. The third and the last. Now we can see that it will be quite easy to fix the 2 upper arms of the steering mechanism with 16mm bolts. They are almost positioning themselves. You just swing them under the beam and find the correct position, just so it will be as sturdy as possible. We have put 4 bolts on each of these. It gives a better hold for them. Now we're having the last bolt. We can check it out a little bit if it's, yeah, it works as a steering mechanism. This is all for step 19. Step 20. In step 20 we're making the first part of a structure which will hold the back wheels. And we're starting with kind of a 3-beam construction. It's a quite straightforward build with just brackets put into beams, and I'll just begin. We can see here that we're putting nuts into 1, 5, and 11 and 12, but as we don't need to count up to 11 and 12, we can see easily that it's in the end. I'll start with that. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 in the end. The other one are a bit more simple. It just have 1 in the end and 1 at the 2 last positions. I can just maybe take all the nuts we need. 1, 3, 7, 8 with first, third, second, last, and last. It's good to just finish with all the nuts first. There we go. We start from this end and going, for example, counterclockwise. 2 holes simple, facing outwards, another one in the end. Another one facing inward on the second position there. Then we have some L-twist mirror brackets that are just put into this Second, I'll fix them so they don't fall out, because they're not put into a slot, they are just put into the beam channel L. So I've come to this. More 2-hole simple. Okay, put it in there. Now comes 3 long 3-hole brackets. They are put into this was in the second, this is in the last, and positioning them above the nuts we have put in, and we have some fastening of the bolts to do, which will be the last thing on this step. These 3-hole brackets are having adjustable holes in them, so we don't need maybe to tighten, because later we will do that when we have adjusted the fitting. So step number 20, I forgot one in the corner, but now it is finished. We're at step 21. In step 21 we're continuing with the previous part we made, part of the frame for the back wheel fixture. We need only 8 centimeter and 1 2 centimeter for this, and it's put in this position with simply 4 2-hole simple brackets. We'll check out where to put the different nuts. We'll put one in number 5, 1 2 3 4 5, lower position, then one on the opposite side, then there's always one in the end when you have this simple 2-hole brackets, so I'll put it there, and then we have one on position 4. This one will have 2 nuts. So I'll probably just put the simple 2 holes, one in each end of this small beam. Then I'll put it into the cross beam. The last of the 4 simple 2-hole to receive the cross beam. I think it's time now to try to insert this one into the previous part. Yep. Now we've got just 3 more bolts and everything is done with step number 21. I forgot. Of course, I have to have a receiving nut there, so there we go. Now this frame is now getting more rigid and sturdy. Step number 21 finished. Step 22. Now it's time to put this motor bracket into the whole car chassis, and the way we start is to put in the nuts as indicated by the red nuts in the drawing. This first goes in the 3rd hole on this side, second one, the 3rd hole like this, the other side, and then 3rd hole in the back, then on the other side, the last one is in the 10th position from this side, so just count it like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's the nuts needed, five of them. Then you can easily slide in the front into the beams there, and it's quite tough, this beam, so you can just bend out the wheel arches in order to slide in the long brackets in the back. We put in the bolts, screw in the bolts, first 2 in the front of the now here it is okay to adjust a little bit so that this is approximately 90 degrees and looks like it's straight. I think it is now. In the design it will be a little bit of the brackets visible in the back, but that's just how it is. So now the whole motor fix part is inserted into the whole car chassis. So that was step number 22. Step number 23. We continue with the wheel fix parts. This one is prepared for putting on the motor later with the wheel, and we always start with putting in the nuts as indicated in the drawing. First position number 4 on this side. Make notice of which side the nuts are. Some are on one side and some are on the other. In this case it's to on each side in these positions, and using the screwdriver to push them in. We can start from this direction. There's this 90 degrees bracket put into first position there. We fix it with the bolt. We can take this L bracket into the fourth position there, put in the bolt. Now these brackets, you really don't need to tighten the bolts because it will need some adjustments later, so you don't need to tighten them very hard, just so it sits temporarily. I'll put in the second to hold 90 degrees. The last bracket is the 3-hole, the long one, into the rightmost position in the beam, and I'm not tightening too much. They can be adjusted later, up and down. That was simply step 23. We'll continue with this part later. Step 24. In this step we will fix the motor into the motor fix part called S, and I have prepared all the parts we need. We need the motor bracket part, we can call it, the angled metal motor bracket itself. We will need self-locking nuts, 3 of them, M3. We will need 3 16mm bolts. Make sure that they have the correct length. 16mm is measured from the bottom of the bolt head to the tip of the bolt. The threads, so to say, that's the length which should be 16mm. That's how bolts are measured. We need the wheel coupler and the motor itself. I'll start with putting this motor bracket plate into the beam. It's made so that it nicely fits into the beam. We used the 2 brackets here with 3 bolts to secure it into the S part. Simply don't forget the motor bracket should be also there. Now we can just enter and slightly tighten the lock nuts. So I will take the second one and slightly tighten the lock nut. We will tighten the lock nuts later. Now this last one. In order to tighten lock nuts, you can't use your fingers unless you are terribly strong, but I prefer to use, for example, a plier. Then I will tighten the second one, holding it with a plier. Last one. So you could, before you tighten finely and hard, make sure that it seems to be quite straight. Then you can take the final tightening, use some force. We use only 3 holes in this motor brackets, it's more than enough. Now the time has come to put in the motor. You would want to align it so that this white part is pointing kind of in the lower position against this one, and that's a convenient way to, because you can align it 2 ways. Obviously you have 2 holes in order to fix it, so in a way like this is good. The white one pointing towards me. It will work both ways, but the cables are more conveniently fixed in this way. Now the motor is fixed. The last thing is that we could put on the wheel coupler. Then we use the bolt set screws. You will hit the flat end with the first one. For security, you can put in the other one on the other side. This concludes the step of putting on the motor into the motor bracket. Step 25. In step 25 we take the part that we finished last step, the motor with its fixing brackets, and we will put it into the car frame itself. Now, as always, look at the instructions. We will put in the nuts first. It's indicated number 2 in this beam. Lower position. So then it is number 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Might be a bit awkward to insert the nut in such a corner, but you can either use a plier, or if you make it with the fingers, it's okay. Insert it all the way. It should be now ready. These 2 nuts in the lower position to receive these 2 brackets. These are not tightened in the step where we made it, so you can do it so that you can adjust a little bit afterwards. So you can put them in the outer position there. Now we will try to see if we can enter them into the car itself. Here you can see that there's an effect of this bracket. It stops a bit into the bolt that we use for the motor. So what I'm doing is I'm putting that in a more outer position, which is okay to do. And we can now enter it all the way in. I will now put in, see if we have been lucky with the position of the nuts. Seems like we got one there. The last one. Found a nut there as well, yes, good. Last step is to tighten. See that it's quite straight. Tighten in the beam for the motor beam itself. All 4 bolts tightened, and with a little springy effect, it will be nice as a spring. It seems to be sitting exactly where it should. Step 26. We will now fix the wheel barrel for the other back wheel to a beam that is used to fix the wheel assembly into the frame. In this step we're using beam plugs which will stabilize how the wheel barrel is fixed to the beam. The beam plug has the function of strengthen the beam at the point where the bolt is entered. And it's important that you will find the correct slot and hole where to enter the beam plug, because otherwise the wheel could be sitting a little bit askew. But you will count that the hole of the thick part of the beam plug is exactly in the center of the 3rd slot there. It's easy when you look at the illustration in step 26 in the instructions. I put them in from both sides. Then I use an 8mm bolt. It's important that you use 8 because 6 you won't get the nut to grip. So 8mm for use for beam plugs. And we will find the screwdriver. It's easier to enter with the screwdriver. You can see the bolt penetrating on the other side. Now we will use a square nut instead of the standard totem nut. The square nut fits into the beam plug. You just hold it there and tighten. So now we just check the hole for the long bolt is in the center of the 3rd slot there, just as in the instruction. The only thing we have to do now is to put the wheel barrel that we made previous, the last one, and enter a lock nut on the other side. Now, since this is bearings, we need some help in order to be able to tighten this. And this is the smart trick we use, is an Allen key and holding with the plier. Tighten, well, reasonably hard, so it's really sitting tight and well. Step number 27. We will now put this wheel barrel with beam. We'll put it into the car frame itself. There is 2 brackets already assembled in a previous stage, and they should receive this part well. If there is the difficulty in entering it, you could adjust it here a bit back and forth, but I tried it and it wasn't needed in this case. I'll put in 2 nuts behind those brackets so that we could finally fix this part. Now simply tighten using the standard 6mm bolts. And that's all for this step, in fact, and we have all 4 wheel barrels and fixings finished. Step number 28. In this step we finally attach the wheels to the car. We use M4 bolts in this case. It's a 10mm long, 4mm diameter bolt with a more normal Phillips screwdriver head. So you would like to have a Phillips screwdriver equivalent for this step. What I'm normally doing is that I hold both the screw and wheel like this and enter this into these 12mm hex wheel fixes. So I will show you. It's when you just have it entered, you can just hold the wheel and tighten. Good. Same on the other side. You can in fact also put the car on the side. Make sure that it is entered. This is free wheel, spinning wheel to the front. Put the car on the other side. Last wheel. Yep. Starts looking more like a car. Step number 29. In this step we will make a kind of a small cage or bracket fixture for all the electronics that will be put in later. If you see the instructions in step 29, it's not exactly how the instructions has been before. We now think that you will be able to build with the totem parts a little bit more automatically and see how it can be done. So we call it a standard C bracket corner in this case, and straight simple corners. For example, these 2 long ones will be connected like this. And you can see then there will be quite standard straight bracket, 2-hole bracket corners. So once you have learned this, you don't need to have it so detailed explained. So I would suggest that you start with these 2 corners and 2 long brackets and the short one. Start with nuts, lower position, in the end of each of them, and you will see that it's After a while you have made quite many of these. I will then just put in the bolts in with the 2-hole simple brackets and put them into the short one. It's a good start. All the 2 centimeter beams will be used as legs for this electronics fixture, and it's in the corners. And in this case we will use standard C bracket. You can see the C bracket there. So I'll put nuts in this position and then here. I will put the C bracket in first here, for example. And fumbling a little bit, there we go. Sometimes it's easier to start with one rather than the other, and if we started like we did with the C bracket on this, we had to try to get the screwdriver in like this. If we instead starts with putting the C bracket on the short one, putting in the nut there, it's much easier to use the screwdriver unobstructed. Sometimes the sequence is quite important for handling. So now we will continue with maybe the 2 next legs, which is fixed with an L-twist corner. It is illustrated with a couple of examples here, but the important thing is that the nut is going into the 6th position from this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Upper position because the brackets is on the underside. We use these L-twist and L-twist mirror. For example, this one can be, so you can enter from the outside. It will not be a total disaster to do it the other way, but it's easier to use the screwdriver from the outside. You can push it into the outer position like that. Then this one is in center here. You will see then when we are putting in another leg piece, you can use the screwdriver from the outside like this. Using the other L bracket, fixing it. can be in the outermost position. We will again, you can access from the outside. It's a bit more convenient unless it's quite awkward to have it on the inside. Now we're coming this far. There are some C brackets that will be used as, call it feet, for these legs, pointing outwards. So that means that all these legs will have a nut on the backside. So why not just take all these 4 nuts where they belong. Now it's easy to add the C brackets. These will later be used for fixing it into the car. I think that's the last one, the feet. There's one more thing to do in step 29. We're finished with the main structure. But it is one extra part, one extra beam that we have added there because it makes the fixture of the electronics better and easier. So we have added an extra support beam on the inside. You can see how it is aligned. And we use some straight 2-hole simple brackets to fix it into the frame. So as it is indicated here in slot number 2, you will have this first bracket, and the other one seems to be then in the end of this one. It doesn't have any number assigned in the instructions, but it's the last position there that needs this. So I'll just needs the 2 last nuts into the supporting beam there. You will get this supporting beam, electronic support beam, properly fixed. So I think that's it for step 29. Step 30. In step 30 we're just preparing with some nuts, 4 nuts put into the frame that will be used in the next step. And it will be much easier if you put the car on its head, because the nuts will be on the underside. You can see that one nut is in this inner beam here, close to the motor, at the 3rd position, and on the underside. I'll do this first. That was the first. You will see that the next one is in the corner. And it might be a bit tricky to use your hand, so you could try with a plier to help. You might save some time or fingers if you do it like that. On the other side, you can see it's good to do the same. It's in the corner. Now this one will be on the third position from this side. Also, I think I would like to use a plier for that. So basically that's it. They will be aligned. So that seems fine. Third position, corner position. So I think we're done with step 30. Step number 31. In this step we will attach the electronics frame into the car chassis. In an earlier step we have already attached some L brackets, adjustable, in this position for the front of the cage. Make sure they are in the lowest possible position, all the way down. Seems to be now. Now we will see if we can put this frame we made into the chassis. It seems like it slips in well there. We can try to fix one of the back brackets. We can take one on the other side. Then we can take the two in front. And we need to put in bolts first. In the front, in the back there is no need. Last two in the bottom. Now this frame for electronics is not entirely for the electronics, it also stiffens the frame considerably, so it's has two purposes. In a later stage we will prepare for fixing electronics into this one. That's it for step 31. Step 32. This is a step where we are inserting the battery into the frame. In order to do that, we use two C brackets as battery stoppers on each side on the back here. I will show you. In the fourth slot, counted from the outside, we put a nut in the upper position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and upper position. There will be a nut for this C bracket. On the other side, exactly the same. We can then, on this side, we can add the C bracket. Notice that in this case, the C bracket is in fact bolted directly to the nut, not the standard way on the other side of the beam, but in this case, directly on metal against metal, on top of the nut. That's also one technique we often use in the building wood totem. So we will now insert the battery. You can see the wire will be pointed backwards, and we should insert the battery here. It will be a bit tricky to squeeze it in without bending too much, so I prefer to unscrew the wheel arch just temporarily. Then it's easy to put in the battery where it belongs. Now I can attach the wheel arch. And now I can fix the second battery stopper, making sure that the wire goes neatly towards the back. Now it fits nicely with some foam padding in the front, and that's it. The battery is in place. Step 33. In this step we will prepare for mounting the electronics into the car, and we do that by using standoffs, nylon standoffs. On the car beams here we are using 8mm standoffs. They are black in this kit, so it's easy to distinguish from the other ones that we're using later. So take the black ones, 8mm, for this step. But first we will put nuts into the beams. We are counting from one end, and I will use a plier. It's a bit easier. I could use the fingers, but it's easier with the plier. The first one will go into number 2. Number 3. Counting on the other beam, number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then one will be on number 10 here. Push them in. On the other side, number 2. Number 3. Number 7. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Number 11. Push them all the way through. So we have the nuts inserted, and we can start screwing these standoffs into the nuts. You can first enter them slightly. Push this nut in. So it's 8 of them, 8 nuts and 8 standoffs. I use this socket wrench to fasten them. You can also use your fingers, or you can use maybe a plier, but this one is quite handy. It's 5.5 millimeter. That fits this one quite well. But I don't want to tighten too much. It's plastic. It's easy to snap them. If you're using too much force, you shouldn't need to tighten them too much, because it's just holding electronics. It's not like it's holding anything mechanic or high force or anything. Just slightly tighten. So this concludes step number 33, and we're on to the next, where we're adding electronics into this part. Step 34. We're now mounting the first electronic boards in the car, and it's 3 boards, PCBs, that are going to be mounted. It's 2 microprocessor Totem bus boards, one with an X3 version, which has a Bluetooth functionality, and the more slave-like X2 processor board with an STM32 microprocessor. We'll start with the X3, and you can see the direction in which it will be mounted in the instructions quite clearly. The antenna will be away from me, and the reset push button will be towards me. I have grounded myself in the ankle. It's good practice. Be careful not to make too much anti-static electricity when handling electronics. I'm using 7mm nylon standoffs to fix the boards into the black standoffs underneath. 7mm is perfect for when you add the other function board in the next step. So please make sure that it's the white ones, which is 7mm high, that you use in this step. So it's rather convenient to now fix. You don't even need a tool. So we'll take the X2 board next in this position, and I can see that the direction is like this. You can see, for example, the red connectors, they are opposite each other in the instructions, so it's quite easy to see where it should go. Again, 7mm standoffs used as bolts in a way. maybe use this to tighten a little bit. Don't tighten too much, it's just so you feel that it comes to the end there. Last thing in this step is the switchboard for the battery. It will be in the back, and we are using 4 bolts in this case. Not nylon standoffs, but there's nothing coming above this board. Make sure that the switch is facing backwards. The switch is to turn the electricity on for the car or off, and then you can charge it. More of that later. So I'll take 4 6mm bolts, standard Totem bolts, and fix this battery connection board with 4 bolts because it's more stable that way. This is the last one, so we're done with step number 34. Step number 35. Now we will mount the function boards on top of the base boards. So there are 2 function boards. One is called function board 30, the power supply board. It feeds up to 2 amps of 5 volts to the system, but from 12 volts or from the battery voltage, which is often between 11 and 12 volts. And you can see how it is facing. It's facing with the connector there and all the whites from my direction, this one in facing me. So you will also see that the connectors will snap like this. Carefully just find the way that so that the connectors snap together, but you don't need to push hard or anything, because when you put on normal 6mm Totem bolts diagonally into the white standoff, it will gently squeeze enough so that the connection is good and will stay that way. As you can see, we have 4 mounting holes on all the electronics, but we have seen that you can save some time and material using a diagonal method of fixing it, because it's quite enough for most purposes, and so using all 4 would be maybe a bit too much. Next one is the board which has a DC motor controller and 2 servo motor outputs. A combination function board is called function board 53. It's easy to see, it cannot be put in the wrong direction. You can see how it has to be connected with the 2 connectors. We'll find the connectors fitting together, and we'll just do the same with the diagonal fixing with 2 bolts. And this concludes step number 35. We're finished with installing the electronics boards. Next will be cabling. Now we have come to the final step, or steps I should say, is connecting the wires. We don't have any step number for this. It's then step number 36, and that is all the wires. I will start with the totem bus wire connecting the two microprocessor boards together. Since they are facing as they are, these boards, I think it is easier if you temporarily take off the function boards. It is possible to use a plier, or if you have small fingers or anything to connect them, but I think it's better to do it like this. It's just a few seconds more. Be careful to put them on an anti-static bag. It's much easier now to get access to these totem bus connectors. Now, there is not any difference between the two connectors on this, so you can select whatever connector you want. They are parallel coupled. But the important thing is that when you are facing this side of the baseboard, this index tap on the connector is in a right position. It is positioned on the right side. Otherwise, you may break it, or because this is making sure that you're not turning it the wrong way. Don't use the red one. This is for the motor. That's why we have different colors, black towards black. And then you can quite simply push it in. Now you can also hide this cable between these two boards. Again, since this board is facing in the other direction, this index pin will be still if you face this board on the right side. So there it is. Then I'll put this one back. I will put this one back and remount with the bolts. So I'm sorry that I tricked you to put on the function boards in the last step, but in order to make it easier for you, I think this is the best way. The rest of the cables are more easy to access with the connectors. So that was the totem bus cable. Next comes the battery cable. It's already there. So it goes naturally into this connector, it's the XT60. I would probably put it underneath. Later you will use some zip ties to tidy up all the cabling, but I think it's better to put it under this beam, and we will later tidy it a bit up. This is quite simple, it's just push it in there. It should be tidied up like this a bit. Yeah, that's good. Well, you have probably seen this servo cable lying around. I think it would be wise to put it up in this hole there. You might do it otherwise. We will tidy up a little bit with the zip ties later. So you will see that the brown wire will be facing to this direction. You can see it clearly in the instructions which way the cable connector will be inserted. You will not harm either the board or the servo if you flip it the wrong way, because it's made so that it won't short circuit anything, but it won't work. So it's important that the brown cable or wire of the three is facing this direction when you have the car like this. Just look at the instructions for guidance. Well, that was the servo cable. Then we have power cables. There are two cables in the kit. One with 4 wires, it's JST plastic connectors, 2 mm spacing. One with 4 wires, one with 2 wires. We start with one with 2 wires. This one delivers 12 volt or 11 something plus volts from the battery to the power regulator board. So it says V out on this board, and it's impossible to push it into the wrong, so you have to just find the notches and index pins on the connector and gently push it in. Now it says input here on the power board. It's very important that you put it into these correct ones, otherwise it will not work correctly. This one, which is further away from the edge than these two. We will tidy up later. Now, we will feed both 5 volts and battery power 11-12 volts from these connectors to the function board. We use the full battery power for the motor controller, and we use 5 volts for the servo. This is easy, it can only be inserted one way, so here you see. Now the power cables are correctly inserted. And the last cable to be fitted into the car is the motor cable, giving power from the motor controller function board here to the motor. It's best to start with flipping the car upside down, and please observe again this index pin, always to the right. Also you can see the red stripe to the right when pushing in from the edge of the connector. Now you should feed the cable to the upside. You can go through here, for example. There's no right or wrong way. You just need to make sure that you have it fed up to the upper side, making maybe a nice fold like this. That looks good. Here it is. The upper side. Again, index pin, red stripe to the right. Here it goes. Red connector towards red connector. So this concludes the wiring. Now in theory this should work. It blinks, it has the power lights, but more of that later, how to operate it and everything. But now it is, the base of the car is finished. There will be more steps if you want to make the, of course, the top, like the truck top or any other top, but for now you have a car that can be driven. The final thing that you want to do is to tidy up the cables. They shouldn't be flying around like this, and especially in here with the servo cable. So what I'm suggesting is to use the zip ties, the small one, and find some convenient places to fix the different wires into the beams. That's the good thing about these totem beams. You have so many ways to fix the wires. I would try to have this servo wire going quite fast into some hiding, so it's not disturbed by if you hit something on the road or driving into something. I would suggest maybe to fold it a bit like this. You could do it, fold it more than once. It's not like a big deal. Where should I try? Maybe there. It's good. There's 1,000 ways to fix this, but it's no right way or wrong way maybe, but just find some ways to tidy up a little bit so it looks nicer and is not sort of short-circuiting or anything. I would probably do something like this with this one. Something like this maybe. It doesn't look too bad. The battery cable should be secured a little bit. That should do it. The last one. I can tie it together with the battery cable also, so it's neatly. I think this is quite good, and you would want to use a plier or something to cut these. I'm using a knife. It's better to use a kind of a cutting plier. Now it looks much more tidy. I will try to turn it on. Things are working. We will have more instruction on how to operate it and maybe find faults in later steps. But for now, the car is finished with the basic chassis. Now we will also show you later how to make cool tops on top of this for trucks or other vehicles, but for now the basic car is finished.